Yeah, well, bore da. So some of you will know me, but I'm David. I'm the MD of Menter Môn and the chair of Lada Cymru for my sins. So the theme of today's workshop is getting ready to supply the public sector in Wales. A thema ydy paratoi'r gadwyn gyflenwyr ar gyfer, paratoi'r i gyflenwyr sector gyhoeddus yng Nghymru. So today's objective is to share with you an overview of how public procurement works in relation to food and drink and discuss some of the requirements and the opportunities. As a result of COVID, businesses have had to evaluate their routes to market. We are seeing a shift in procurement policy to shorten supply chain and source from Wales, and that's obvious in terms of Welsh Government policy. So today's aim is to provide insights into public procurement as a potential market for your products. So if Myrddin can just bring up the slide quickly. So I'm sure most of you will be familiar with Zoom now or Teams, and if you're not, I'm not sure you've been for the last 2 years, but I'd like you to encourage you to use the question and answer. But really, given the numbers here, you're welcome just to put your hand up and we can welcome you to make a comment or ask a question live as well. So the presentation is today in English, but you can contribute in the language of your choice. And also it's worth mentioning that it is being recorded, so it can be shared at a later date. For those of you who are not familiar with Lada Cymru, it's focusing on supporting, preparing, enabling suppliers to access public sector opportunities and facilitating collaborative links between buyers, suppliers and other key stakeholders here in Wales. We'll be kicking off the session with Myrddin Davies, who is supply chain lead for Lada Cymru. Myrddin will be sharing his insights we've gained on existing supply routes and requirements of public sector contracts. Myrddin has 15 years experience in supporting and facilitating businesses, the food chain and trade development with Welsh food and drink enterprises. And he established his food and farming consultancy back in 2018, and he's working on a number of trade development initiatives, including Lada Cymru. And he's sitting here just to the left of me. Then Greg will share what are the quality standards and the requirements as prerequisites to supply the public sector. Now, Greg has a 30-year career in food and drink industry, including Whitbread, Unilever, Dairy Crest, and lastly founding Somerset Larder, the food and drink hub created to service Hinkley Point. And it's interesting because Greg first became involved with Menter Môn and Lada Cymru with a view to supplying Wilfa, which eventually didn't happen. It may happen, but that's how he became involved in this part of the world. His key strengths are in planning and leading implementation of new strategies. He's now working with Menter Môn on the Lada Cymru team, looking at the quality of provision within public procurement and the creation of opportunities for food and drink businesses in North Wales. Now, the last speaker was going to be Mark Grant, and he was going to share his experience and outline the supply chain and how it works from field to fork. Mark has been working closely with the Welsh Government and the Foundation Economy team to support public procurement opportunities within the food and drink sector in Wales. But unfortunately, Mark is not well today, and therefore Greg has kindly stepped in at the last minute to deliver his presentation, but he has all the information and the slides provided by Mark. And with the Q&A, we should finish before 11 AM, certainly not after. So with that, I'd like to transfer the reins over to Myrddin. So over you to Myrddin.
Just unmute myself and sort the sound. Dyna ni. So as David mentioned, I'm Myrddin Davies, supply chain lead for the Lada Cymru, and I'm going to talk through the opportunity. Dwi'n siarad drwy'r cyfle maint ag raddfa'r sector gyhoeddus yng Nghymru, mynd trwy going through the size and the scale of the public sector in Wales. So first of all, I think if we look at the big picture, we've got some pre-COVID statistics here, or facts and figures. They will have changed over the course of the last 24 months, but as we're sort of moving out of COVID, it will be back to a similar picture. So 90 million annual spend on food and drink by the public sector in Wales. Local authorities make up more than half of that spend, followed by the NHS, which is about a quarter of that 90 million. The rest made up of higher education, further education, colleges, universities, military, blue lights, government and public bodies. About 60 million, or 2/3 of that spent, is actually spent with Welsh companies, and the definition of that includes producers and distributors. So that 60 million is either of Welsh origin or Welsh supplied, and I think that's important just to understand from the outset, really. So Welsh origin is product grown, reared or produced in Wales from its primary stage into that finished product. So, you know, the obvious ones would be Welsh beef, Welsh lamb, Welsh vegetables, Pembrokeshire potatoes, it could be Welsh water, but it could also be something like bread, where it's actually from its ingredient form into the end product, all happening in Wales. Welsh supplied, which also makes up the 60 million, is a product that's been sourced from a wholesaler or supplier that's based in Wales, and that's down to the factory or sort of warehouse postcode. Although some of those Welsh supplied products may not be from a Welsh company, it's down to the actual postcode where it's supplied from. And then we've given an indication here that about 2/3 of the spend is on Welsh origin or Welsh supplied, but there are differences within the pie chart here as to how many each spend. So local authorities around the 68%, NHS actually much higher, they're spending about 77%, with the others actually spending much less. HE and FE actually spending 36% of their total spend with Welsh origin or Welsh supplied. So just to give you a quick flavour of the big picture, really, what's happening here in Wales. So how does the procurement take place? And I've outlined here a few scenarios. So first example is that public sector organisation will advertise their own supplier framework. So they will put an advert up on eTender Wales or Sell to Wales. Usually it will be for a period of between 3 and 5 years. And they will stipulate the requirements of that supply chain within their own framework. There is also some flexibility for direct supply. So a public sector organisation may wish to source products for their hospitality or one-off purchasing, quite specific, and they have got flexibility to do that. Up to £5,000 spend would require one quote. And then there are thresholds of 15, 25 and 30k, depending on the individual procurement rules within that public sector organisation, where they can spend subject to 3 quotes. So that's the first example. The other example is that public sector organisation works with a third party to access established frameworks. What that essentially means is that an organisation such as TUCO will have done all the due diligence checks. They will have a framework in place already that public sector organisation can access. That will be by category, and it is basically taking a layer off that public sector organisation where TUCO has already done it, and they would undertake what's termed a mini competition with the suppliers that are on that framework already. So TUCO is one of those third-party frameworks used a lot by public sector. They do advertise their frameworks on a rolling basis per category, and it is an ongoing process. So that's the second example, is to work with a third party. And then the third example is that a public sector organisation may procure their catering services. So that there are examples of local authorities, for example, deciding that they're not going to do the catering in-house. They're going to contract that to a commercial provider. So the contracting element will be going out to the marketplace and contracting a commercial catering provider to provide catering services for that public sector organisation. The contract then would stipulate any specific requirements on provision and supply. So to further emphasise this, really, we did some work looking at North Wales local authorities and how they procure. So what happens in terms of procurement in North Wales. So Gwynedd, first of all, they will do their procurement in-house. So they've got their own framework. So they'll be using that first example where they'll go to the marketplace, they'll develop their own framework, and they will work directly with those suppliers that are selected on that framework. Anglesey are using contract caterers for their school meals provision, but are actually using the Gwynedd framework for supply of food and drink into the care sector. Conwy is using the third-party provider, so they're using the TUCO framework. So the due diligence has been done for Conwy through TUCO. They will undertake a mini competition, and then they will award to the suppliers from that TUCO framework. They're also involved in hospitality, places like Venue Cymru, theatres and so on, where they will procure using their in-house function. And then some of the schools in Conwy are PFI schools, so they're working with Sodexo on the menus for those schools as well. So there's a bit of a mix in Conwy, for example. Denbighshire, they do their own catering in-house. They use the TUCO framework and in-house for anything that they can't get off that TUCO framework. Flintshire, slightly different again in terms of the model, where they have got a company or an entity that's at arm's length from the council, delivering catering and cleaning services within the county of Flintshire. So semi-commercial company called Newydd, but they're actually using the TUCO framework. And then Wrexham, all the catering in Wrexham is done in-house with the local authority staff. They use the TUCO framework apart from sandwich fillings, which they've got their in-house procurement for. So a bit of a range really in North Wales of how they go about procuring. And I think this is sort of the most varied in terms of local authorities. Looking at South Wales, a lot of those authorities are using the National Procurement Service framework. Caerphilly County Council are the lead on that. They've just extended all of the current contracts until the autumn of next year. And there is a process that's imminent in terms of procurement into those South Wales schools and renewing or advertising that opportunity. Higher education, further education, they're sort of also using the TUCO framework, but have got flexibility for that direct spend for more specialist aspects, including the conferencing and that kind of thing that a lot of the sites do. Moving on to the NHS in Wales. So NHS Shared Services Partnership, responsible for procurement on behalf of all NHS health boards and trusts, where there is a common and repetitive requirement. So you can see on the slide there that we've listed all of those health boards that are part of the NHS Shared Service Partnerships. They are advertising on a rolling basis. In the top right hand side there, you can see some of what they've advertised during the last year. Their pre-qualifying factors would be food safety accreditation, STS, and then a financial, which is the Dun & Bradstreet score. And there is within the NHS supply a rebate where it depends on how soon you would like to get paid or how soon the NHS pay you, that there is a percentage rebate on that payment terms. So for example, you can see in the bottom there that rebate is higher the sooner you get paid from the NHS. So there are payment incentives there as well. So giving really some examples there of how the public sector actually purchases. But the next slide I've got here shows how you may be able to supply. So some producers, processors may supply direct. So you may be responding or could respond directly to some of the tenders that will be out there specifically for products, and I'll go into that a bit in a bit more detail later. It may be that you're working with a distributor who is supplying into that public sector organisation. So your product may be quite niche, quite specific, and it's simply not viable for you to supply direct, or that the purchasing authority is looking for a range of products within the contract. So the step there would be to supply through a distributor. And then the final example is that you would supply to a distributor, as a producer supplying to a distributor, who would then supply to a contract caterer, who would then provide the food and drink in that public sector organisation. The requirements may change depending on the route of supply. So local authority hygiene rating would be the standard, and might be the requirement of the public sector organisation, but some distributors may require that the supply into them will be to SALSA or BSC standard. And then there's the STS accreditation as well. I think generally the more steps within the supply chain, the higher the requirements in terms of food safety and so on. What we've seen in terms of assessment criteria, so quality covers sustainability, ethical, standard service delivery, etc. And then there is a weighting on price. And this, in the research we've done, actually fluctuates between 70 and 30% either way. So some tenders will be weighted up to 70% on price, whereas others, the weighting may be 30% on price. So there is a range, there's no set weighting, it can fluctuate. We've seen sort of the both extremes there. And I suppose before I move on to explaining a bit more about Gwynedd as an example, I think it's also timely to say that we're focusing on Wales in this presentation, but there are opportunities across the board there and pan-UK. There is public procurement is devolved, but there is an UK government target wanting every pound in every £3 to be spent with SMEs by 2022. So there are opportunities outside of Wales, and I think it's important that we realise that, but we're just not focusing on Wales. So to give you an example of how Gwynedd contract, advertised in winter 2019, awarded in spring 2020. It was broken down by categories and then into regional supply. So Gwynedd has got the Arfon, Dwyfor and Meirionnydd areas, and then all categories were broken down into those 3 areas, as well as supply into Anglesey specifically for the care sector. The NHS, this is a recent contract award, so supply of patient and retail snacks and hydration products to the NHS in Wales. Total value of this contract was 8.3 million. It had 18 lots, and I've just picked out 2 lots there. One was provision of retail goods to South West Wales NHS sites and provision of patient food spots to NHS Wales sites. You can see there how the NHS are weighting in terms of the award criteria, so quality and cost, and how those 2 headings are broken down. And also there are sometimes options on some of the tenders. So specific on retail goods, there's an option there for additional purchases of non-core or additional retail products may be made to the awarded contractor. So I think sometimes we think of public sector as more of an ingredient buying opportunity, but as we can see here, there are also retail opportunities within the public sector and scope to work with the existing supply chain to actually get those products in. This is very small. We will be sharing the presentations after, but just really the information here is on Sell to Wales. It's in the public domain. So we can see that for the retail element, the NHS received 4 tenders, 2 of which were from SMEs, and they've awarded the contracts to Chapel and Jenkins and Castell Hywel Foods for supply of those retail products, and the total contract value for the Southwest Health Trust is 1.9 million. So if you're looking at specific outlets, you can look at Sell to Wales and so on to be able to find who the appointed suppliers are and the value of that contract as well. Flip side, so lot number 10 was the patient jelly pots. Contractors, 4 tenders received. The tender has been awarded to Harlech Food Service. The value is 26,000 over the course of this procurement duration. So there's lots of information that we can see that's in the public domain through sites such as Sell to Wales. And I just wanted to share with you the Ministry of Justice. So Bidfood is the appointed provider of food and drink and catering to the Ministry of Justice. There was a question in the top there that was asked to UK government in October 2019 on supply and supplier figures. But interestingly, the Ministry of Justice are actually working with a higher percentage of UK companies and SMEs than some of the public sector organisations. They were at Taste Wales with Bidfood as their appointed contractor back in October. And it's really interesting how their supply chain works in that, yes, they do consider nutrition, reducing salt, and the sort of macros that prisoners have day to day, week to week. They do consider cost. There is a set budget per meal per prisoner per day, which they have to work to. They also consider provenance. And there is a stage gate process for introducing new products to the Ministry of Justice, which actually includes a prisoner forum where the prisoners themselves are involved in the decision-making process of any new food and drink products that's actually supplied into the Ministry of Justice. So there's a lot going on possibly that we wouldn't see day to day within that supply chain and introducing new products into that supply chain. But if you wanted to look at the Ministry of Justice, Bidfood is the approved supplier, and the route in within that supply chain would be through Bidfood. And I just want to end really with just a note on that. There is procurement reform happening in Wales at the moment. There is long-term change on the cards. The Welsh government have decided that they're going to be following the UK government's bill, which focuses on procurement processes. That should lead in the future, long-term, to a simpler procurement process, where some procedures will be whittled down to 3, and a single data platform for supplier registration will be in place as well, which from a supply point of view should make things easier. And I just want to end really on that note, that there are opportunities within the current supply chains that shouldn't be discounted, and there is change happening as well, which puts more of an emphasis on provenance of supply and SME supply into the public sector. So happy to receive any questions at the end. Excellent.
Can we just feedback here? Can I bring on a slide for a second before going to Greg? Because there's only a small group of us, if anybody has a question to pose to Myrddin on the basis of that, you're welcome to ask it, or you can put something in the chat. No? Okay, we'll move on then to Greg. So thanks, Greg. Over to yourself.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm just going to cover off.
You're mute, Greg.
Oh,
what?
Hopefully you can hear me. Can you hear me, David? Yeah, cool. Okay, good. Yeah, so just going to touch on accreditations, an exciting subject for you, but I think it's worth just reflecting on Myrddin, sort of outlining the opportunity and just re-emphasising, it's complicated. Public sector supply across the UK is complicated. I work in many different areas, and it's never easy, which is why really there is not enough sort of local and produce from small and medium-sized enterprises supplied into the public sector. But there is a collective group and a will to change that, and part of this today really is just outlining where we are now, and then hopefully sort of sowing the seeds and building some enthusiasm for changing those things in future. And we'll touch on some of the many things that are going on. I think as well, it's a great opportunity, as Myrddin's outlined, and to add to that as well, obviously announced in Wales is that they are going to provide free school meals for the youngest children over the next 2 years, and that will create an opportunity for an extra 200,000 meals served to children in schools, and there's a desire already being put in place for that to be through shorter supply chains. So the opportunity only builds, and people like ourselves, Larder Cymru, are hopefully going to try and make things clearer and then help to businesses such as yourselves to access the public sector. So if I can just, so I'm just going to run through some stuff. So everything starts really in public sector supply around the government supplying standards, government buying standards for food and catering services. And just to touch on that, and we'll have all these resources available on our Larder Cymru website. But within the buying standards for food, there's 48 guidelines, some of which are mandatory, and some of which are best practice. And then I should stay within that as well, as you would have seen from Myrddin's slides, some parts of public sector are judged to be under the mandatory umbrella, and some sit outside of that, and are just encouraged to participate in public sector supply. But these are all things that we can clarify over time. So the actual guidelines are broken down into areas: production and processing, nutrition, resource efficiency, and social and economic impact. And the actual these are government buying standards as of August 2021, but through last year, and they're UK, I should say, at this point in time, through the course of last year, there was a review of combined standards for food by EFRA, and this, well, an inquiry really into how well they were being executed and adhered to, because there was a lot of skepticism, and there was a resulting report that sort of leveled quite a lot of criticism at the current process, and therefore DEFRA are reviewing these standards with a view to making them more mandatable, if that's the word. However, you know, just to sort of further muddy the water, and another challenge for us to crystallize is that actually the new standards that will come about this year are not necessarily applicable in the devolved nations. And the likelihood is that although Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland will embrace many of the standards, there's no clarity yet as to how they will take shape within Wales. And I've shared with you on the bottom the verbatim of the update from DEFRA as of yesterday. But as I say, the intention of this workshop today really is just to give you some of the principles, but reassure you really that there's help out there from the likes of ourselves to clarify things over time. But as I say, essentially everything will start around a set of standards that suppliers and caterers need to adhere to make sure that safe, nutritious food is fed into our public sector. So those are the standards. So many of those standards are already picked up in some of these standards that food producers, in particular food and drink producers, need to achieve in order to qualify for certain accreditations and certifications. What we tried to do here, we worked with STS a couple of years ago, just to try and again crystallize what the journey might be as you go through the accreditation levels. And Merlin touched on it briefly. So to our left, level 1 of accreditation, if you're a primary producer, you'll have to, within 28 days of setting up as a food producer, qualify with or get certified by the local authority. And to some suppliers that supply on to others within the public sector supply chain, that might well be enough, and that might incorporate things such as Red Tractor, things such as FSA qualification for meat, FSC for fish, and lion eggs. Those things will be wrapped up in level 1. And if you are further back the chain, going by Merdin's model, then that might be enough. However, if you're going to supply through the TUCO frameworks, or you're going to supply through wholesalers such as Castle Howell and Harlech Food Service, then you will need to move to level 2 if you're not there already. And level 2 requires producers to take either, to qualify through SALSA, so safe and local suppliers assured, or STS. And I've searched forever to find out what STS stands for. No, it's just a company called STS, so it's not an acronym of, well, it probably was originally, maybe somebody's initials, but anyway, STS qualification is essential for entry level to most of the public sector. And actually now, if you are a SALSA qualified, accredited producer already, there is a bolt-on of the STS accreditation and vice versa. So you can bring the two together with just a minor amend and a slight additional cost, and be ready to supply into most of the public sector. To most of the public sector, that's ready. However, if you're aspiring to grow and supply particularly into retail, then you really want to be heading towards the capability of meeting the main retailer audits, and that will require you to go through getting ready for BRC, British Retail Consortium global standards, and STS lay out a plan of going through sort of getting ready for that process, and then stepping up to it at level 4. And then even within the BRC, British Retail Consortium global standards, there's specifics for food, specifics for storage and distribution, and for agents and brokers, and you can take combinations of that. And those audits, you can allot for those to be done without prior warning, and that will actually score you higher through that process. So that's the accreditation route for suppliers. And again, as I say, the idea is that we'll go into deeper dive workshops in future that go more into the specifics around this. Also, I think what's really important is that although in many cases we're talking to producers here rather than caterers, it's important to understand what sort of standards the caterers will want to aspire to or be mandated to achieve. So more public sector contracts are now requiring some sort of involvement with the Food for Life Served Here accreditation scheme. Food for Life is set up by the Soil Association, and just to clarify, it doesn't mean that everything's organic. Soil Association is a multifaceted body. Organic accreditation is one of the things they do, but this Food for Life Served Here standard is for both organic and non-organic participants to take part, and it's very much aligned with all the things you would expect, again, coming from the government buying standards for food, but starts to reach out then into some of the more sort of social value and the corporate social responsibility goals. Also helps to keep an eye on the healthy and sustainable diets. And I think one of the key things that are coming out with the Free School Meals initiative, one of the main objectives is to actually build community around food and get children eating their meals together. And that's very much laid out in one of the objectives through the Food for Life Served Here programme as well. Just what does it mean to the customer? I'll let you digest that for yourself. And as Merlin alluded to, is what's quite exciting, I think, amongst public sector supply is people are waking up to the fact, governments are waking up to the fact that for every £1 spent on food from a producer, that generates £3 worth of value in the local economies. And it sounds like magic, but it's logic, because that money travels through and affects so many, whether it's through wages or whether it's just simply going back to the primary producer. It creates money within the local economy. So the focus, although there's still a heavy focus on the price paid at point of purchase, there is more and more focus now on the social value impact, and we'll touch on that a little bit later as well. So again, keeping standards for the caterers, and many of the contract caterers that are involved in public sector supply will be mandated to meet the Food for Life Served Here standards. And the standards range from bronze, and I'm just going to flick all these up in the interest of time. So you know, stretching targets, some very specifics around food products, and some ancillary services that support the general well-being of, as an example, children in schools. And then moving on to the silver and gold standards, starts to get more of a requirement around the primary producers, and then also a heavy focus, which we're delighted to see, on buying through shorter supply chains. And that's not fanatical about everything must come from within a 30-mile radius. It's a common sense approach to say, actually, what can we buy? What can we buy in season? What can we buy from our fresh local suppliers? And then actually, do you know what? There's going to be stuff that just has to come from further away. And again, I mean, aligned with the nutritional standards and the increasing motivation to get people eating healthy diets. And especially, relevant to hospitals, because prevention is better than cure. So do you know what? If people have come in and you're feeding them, feed them healthy food, and maybe they won't return so quickly. So that was just a quick, brief departure into Food for Life Served Here. And as I say, it's another workshop that we could dive back into and get some representatives to come up and talk to us about. But we touched on social value, and we touched on other things now influencing the food supply to public sector. And just, I mean, obviously the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act is becoming the core of most strategies throughout Welsh Government. And food's a very important player within that. And just touching on to the left of that here with community wealth building, these are sort of nice jazzy phrases, but what do they actually mean? Well, quite basically, anchor institutions spending their money more locally generates all sorts of benefits, and that's what we mean by community wealth building. And just to our right, Wales have been at the forefront really of driving social value across the country, working with the local authorities, and much of that work has been supported by the Social Value Portal, who are an independent business that work with governments. But as I say, Wales have been at the forefront, and they held their very successful National Social Value for Wales conference late last year, yeah, it's reassuring that there's focus beyond price as well as quality. And whilst there's been a lot of activity in the last 2 years, you know, this is not something new. The Public Services Social Value Act was actually put in place nearly 10 years ago. So whilst it seems new, it's been around for a while. And Rhys Jenkins from the Social Value Portal presented for us a couple of weeks ago at an event. And what's reassuring again is how food will play a part in that social value. And these are just some of the objectives that are broader reaching objectives around the social value strategy. But more importantly, there's a focus on using a TOMS. TOMS means themes, outcomes and measures, which is a way of putting measurements into social value, of creating a bespoke way of measuring social impact through food and drink into public sector. We're working with them on that to make it extremely straightforward to complete, and meaningful, and something that can be used in public procurement. As Merlin alluded to, you know, there's historically been a balance up between quality and price, 70-30, and various levels in between. But increasingly now, public sector buyers are including, or local authorities are including, a percentage up to 10% of weighting towards social value. So these are things that will be part of future contracts, and important that you should be aware of it. And then just beyond that as well, just sort of, you know, Welsh Government again is very committed, as you would expect, to meeting the sustainability goals, the net carbon zero goals, and there's multiple initiatives kicking around. But just as an example of how committed, Welsh Government made a statement that they'd like Wales to be the leading nation for B Corp certification, and in order to facilitate that, they've actually put in place a funding program that funds the getting on board with B Corp, and actually the first year's fees that go with it. And B Corp, for those of you who might not be aware of, we will go into in a future workshop, but it's about using business as a force for good, and it very much aligns with some of the objectives of SMEs. So just one example. So you know, I could have filled the hour with just accreditation and how you can get ready for public sector supply, but the objective here is to really whet the appetite. It is tricky, but we aim to make it easier, and I will just, again, mindful of time and taking questions later. I can see there's probably a question in the chat. I'll just run through Mark's slides on the supply chain, and then hopefully we'll leave some time for Q&A. So hello everyone, I'm not Mark Grant, but pretending to be today. Mark comes with a wealth of experience, and he really is aligned and working closely with Larder Cymru, which we're very pleased about. But Mark prepared just a brief snapshot of the public sector supply chain as it is and as it might be going forward. So just some of the things, as we keep talking about complexity, well, of course it is. I mean, the key thing with public sector is the food needs to be where it needs to be, when it needs to be there. And at your peril, you fail in that objective, because ultimately what's going to happen in a prison if lunch isn't served on time? What's going to happen in a school if lunch isn't served on time? Now, these are dire, you know, there could be dire consequences to this. So it's critical, first and foremost, that food is where it needs to be when it needs to be there. And I think what's happened over time is that's got extremely complex as more choices become available, and as more companies have become available. It's meant that we've got a very fragmented supply chain. So just looking, you know, again, if you just took it in the first place and saying all the things that people need to buy, and all the multiple suppliers that could be involved in that. And Mark's just illustrated here that an average school would receive 18 deliveries a week, you know, which is spread across milk, bread, fruit and vegetables. So, and that takes up an enormous amount of time, but that's just where we are. That's where we are today. There's different wholesalers, there's some direct suppliers, and it just leaves plenty of room for error, but also for improvement. So that's sort of, say, a quick snapshot of where we are today. And this is it done in Victorian fashion. Yeah, it looks like one of those puzzles that you need to resolve. But yeah, I mean, essentially on our left here, you know, these might not even be primary producers, but let's assume they are. We've got consolidators in the middle, which will be food service or wholesale, and that could be the veg guy bringing the dairy stuff in. It could be the dairy guy bringing the bread in, and it could be the wholesalers bringing the gravy mix in. But there's a whole sort of array of options here, and then further complexity in the end. So lots of vans passing each other on the road. I think Mark didn't put it in writing, but suggested that in 1 year, if you streamline this to a logical solution, you could probably reduce nearly 1 million journeys, which just sounds pretty crazy. But anyway, this is where we are today. So there's a vision, and the vision is for the long term to have a load of the complexity taken out, and that solution being provided through knowledge, through collaboration across the local authorities in Wales, bring best practice together, and that in turn there are potential technology solutions that will help with that as well, but that shouldn't stop us. We shouldn't wait for there are opportunities to do that today, just by sharing knowledge and also working with Welsh Government to make themselves clear as to how it could work. Within that, there is a broad intention on every side to increase the level of Welsh produce bought, and that's not an easy fix, because some of that will not be grown yet, and it won't be intention to be grown yet. But hopefully, armed with the future potential supply, there can be some encouragement for producers to bring on more livestock, plant more crops. There is obviously, and quite rightly, a desire to improve food quality, which in turn will improve the diets, and that should never be dismissed, given that we are very aware as food producers that there have been some real tragedies in public sector supply where quality standards have slipped. And of course, sustainability must be at the core of everything we do. I think it's at the core of what everything everybody does. There'll be commercial reasons behind that, but actually, I think sustainability is one thing, but the aspiration should be that we move to a regenerative approach, whereby actually we're making things better for the long term, and not just keep staying where we are. And yeah, I mean, actually the SMEs, whether it's in Wales or across the UK or globally, are the core of the commercial community, financial community, and critical to create more opportunities, and for SMEs to believe that there's an opportunity to supply into public sector. And there's collaborations begun. I mean, the fact that Mark works with us, working with Welsh Government, working with Lada Cymru, Kevin Morgan's bringing together some buying standards for schools into a manual as on the behest of Welsh Government, and there is far more dialogue, and the ambition of Lada Cymru now is to take a Pan Wales approach, bring together the parties that can really make a difference and help to make it happen, and whilst doing that simultaneously is to build a supply chain of ambitious suppliers that are ready to meet the standards and the capacity that's going to become available. So this is the optimum. This is our nirvana. I think is that the right word? Or our ambition is that actually, there's a far more simplicity. And you can imagine you don't have to be an economist to work out that that's going to be far more efficient and potentially open up far more opportunities. So it won't happen quite like this picture, but we feel there's a lot of steps in between where we can improve things by working through shorter supply chains and collaborating across many different departments and stakeholders. So I'm not Mark Grant. Here's Mark's details. The presentation will be available. I think now I'm going to hand back to David to talk us through the Q&A.
Yeah, thanks, Myrddin and Greg, and also thanks, Mark, for preparing the slides, even though if you didn't actually present them. Yeah, so there's a lot of information there, and it makes sense, doesn't it? It always has made sense. But there seems to be support from the public for it to happen. There seems to be support from the government in terms of procurement reform, and there is support available through Lada Cymru and others as well. It's obviously not just us. We've had I have a question in chat from maybe on that. So I'm not sure, maybe Greg, can you speak more about the auditing of the Food for Life? And maybe you're welcome to come in on this as well yourself if you want to elaborate on that.
Yes, I mean, sure. I mean, again, we're talking on behalf of organisations that we don't want to do an injustice to by by trying to blag it, I think, for want of a better word. But we've got a comprehensive, detailed presentation from Food for Life served here that we'll make available through the Larder Cymru website. And there is a Food for Life served here accreditation for suppliers as well. So we will share details on that as well. And again, we are just now putting together our program of workshops. And I made a note earlier is that, you know, I think there is an appetite for online and physical, obviously, in the future get-togethers, but focusing in on these complex subjects is probably quite key. So actually, I think what we'll try and do is really focus workshops. It might be a bit shorter, but just focus on one particular project. So we might well do one that is just around Food for Life served here.
Okay, thanks, Craig. Craig?
Yeah, got a couple of questions really reverting back to supply chains and into the public sector. What support is available for SMEs that want to supply into the public sector? And I'll take that a bit further as well. And is there like a checklist that suppliers can complete or must complete before tendering?
Shall I go first, Mervyn, and I might hand over to you as well. But yeah, I mean, you might tell from my accent and the lack of Welsh language that you know, I'm based the other side of the Severn, and you know, I look upon the support that Welsh Government are laying out and will continue to lay out for food and agri-food producers, and I look on with envy because there's heaps out there. I think the trouble is that it's vast and sometimes quite difficult to access. And I think, you know, again, part of the Larder Cymru project, which we've just really started again, I think we should take on the task to try and really simplify, you know, what is available for what type of producer, for what type of public sector organisation. And as I explained in a bit earlier about, you know, is there a checklist? Well, you know, to accompany the government's buying standards for food, there was a scorecard developed that actually did have a checklist, but that was kind of kicked down the road a bit when they decided to review the whole thing. So again, I think we can take on a bit of responsibility to perhaps bring something together that again is specific by supplier type, and then maybe cross-checked against particular sectors. Not something we've got today, but I think it's something that we can probably do within the realms of this project. So what do you think, Mervyn?
Yes, exactly the same. You know, that there is support available through Larder Cymru moving forward, and I think it needs to be bespoke to that individual supplier business and their circumstances, and the tender that they're responding to. I think that's really you know, the requirements will be stipulated by the contracting authority. There will be commonalities across all public sector organisations, but at the end of the day, a supplier will need to respond to that individual contract or tender, and we can work to support that.
Craig?
Yeah, final question is in terms of supply opportunities for the public sector, other than Sell to Wales, what sort of outlets are there to identify opportunities, but also moving across the borders, are there similar sorts of sites that Welsh producers can access in England and Scotland that we know of? Thank you.
I'll go again, Merlin, and then hand over to you. I mean, so the rule is that I think over tenders, contracts currently over £25,000 have to go through Sell to Wales. So there are opportunities to supply more directly, lower than that threshold. Also, you know, as I said earlier, is that there are authorities that are mandated to use the government buying standards in full. And there are others, university would be an example, where there's more flexibility. And again, I think we need to make that transparent. You know, I mean, I think the conversations that are going on now put us in a great position to kind of flesh out and help to shape, because we're engaged with Welsh Government as well, and help to actually shape and influence the rules. And then perhaps Melanie, I might leave to you to talk about the sort of Welsh produce beyond Wales bit.
Yeah, I think the supply routes are in place. We know that some of the Welsh wholesalers or distributors are actually supplying over the border. For example, Harlech Food Services are supplying over in the northwest and into the Midlands. It will be a similar process that they will have followed, for example, with local authorities in those areas. The main consideration, really, I'd say, is that a producer or a supplier needs to consider in terms of volume, and cost is a factor that we can't really move away from. So that there are cost considerations as well, but the opportunities do exist over the border as they do in Wales.
Yeah, and I suppose just finishing that off as well, we work closely with other agencies like Mentor Business who are promoting Welsh produce at every opportunity at events throughout Wales and beyond. And ourselves as Lada Cymru will be at a public sector event in Birmingham in mid-March to promote produce that we believe might be particularly interesting for public sector in England. So yeah, I mean, it's a slow burn, but definitely an opportunity.
Thanks, Greg. And we've aiming to finish at 11, but we've got one question from Evionna. So I'm not sure. I'll aim this at for Greg, but you can bat it back to Mervyn if you want. Will the model not be open to competition from other similar setups as time goes on? And then question 2 as well, model could also be considered a monopoly, is controlling the food supply chain and prices fair for producers and suppliers?
Okay, I mean, I don't think we've talked about a model today. I think what we've talked about is the need, well, firstly about how complicated public sector supply is. And I think we've talked about how collaborating and understanding and clarifying what it means for different parties along the chain, how critical that is in order to meet this opportunity. I mean, let's face it, I think the 200,000 meals, additional free school meals, is going to be a challenge. I don't think there's that amount of produce sitting around waiting for a home. So we need to work towards supplying that. But we haven't talked about a model today. I did mention that there are technology solutions that are being considered and trialed and so on and so forth. But I think, to be honest with you, the focus over the next few months is on just trying to crystallize what the rules are, what the environment is, so suppliers know what it's about. And then at the other end, making sure that we help Welsh Government and the local authorities to really understand how they can source through shorter supply chains and build robust supply chains for food, simplifying it. Have a go, Merlin.
No, I only just add on to that, really, that specifically on school meal provision, the marker has been set by government in that free school meals. The ambition is to have the ingredients for those meals to be from Welsh companies and sourced by Welsh companies, so Welsh origin and Welsh supplied. So there are opportunities there for producers, suppliers, and the entire supply chain to respond to that. So I think the marker has been set by governments, and there's an opportunity now for suppliers and producers to respond to that, specifically on school meals in Wales, which is happening and will be provided to, as I understand, to school children of infant age from September onwards.
Thank you both. And it's worth just clarifying that through Monlada there will be one-to-one support for up to 50 businesses. So as well as the range of workshops and events, there is a requirement really to provide that one-to-one support and do some hand-holding and use them as case studies for others to follow. So I think that support is also there. So Greg, you want to add to that?
I've just put up on the screen the sort of process. I mean, that we've outlined. You know, there's some flexibility in that, but you know, I think, you know, what we want to make sure that we target it to those that, you know, that are serious, I suppose, and obviously that we have a structure to it that can, you know, take people through to realise the opportunity and their capability of delivering against it, and then, you know, set out some actions. So yeah, this program is available through the website, all applications considered, and you know, we're excited about it as hopefully you know, some of the businesses that we work with will be.
Okay. Thank you, Greg. So yeah, so it's 11 o'clock now. There is a range of events coming up. We'll have the event in Birmingham next, and a range of face-to-face events, which will be quite refreshing moving forward, and also that one-to-one support. So yeah, I'd like to thank obviously Greg and to Myrddin and to Craig to organise this. All these sessions will be on the website as well, so people can revisit them, or others can attend as well. If you want to recommend it to a friend, some Saturday evening viewing, you never know. Okay, and that's diolch yn fawr iawn I chi am fynychu, ac welai chi fuan. Diolch yn fawr iawn I chi. Okay, ta-ra.
Thank you. Thank you.